My name is Eliza Fairchild. I am 33 years old, and 3 months ago, my parents taught me exactly how little the word family meant to them. I had traveled nearly 18 hours from Hawaii to North Carolina for my younger sister's wedding. I arrived carrying a carefully wrapped gift, still believing someone would be happy to see me. Instead, my mother stepped in front of the entrance and blocked my path. My father stood beside her without offering so much as a greeting. My mother looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Only family is allowed inside. You are not invited. Leave before you embarrass your sister." I thought I had misunderstood her. I had already paid a $4,200 deposit toward the venue, catering, flowers, and photography. They were expecting me to approve another $38,000 after the reception. Yet when the groom's mother approached and asked who I was, my mother claimed I was connected to the wedding's billing department and had arrived at the wrong time. My father did not correct her. I could have exposed everything right there, but I refused to turn my sister's ceremony into a public argument. I carried my gift back to the rental car and drove away as the wedding began without me. 3 days later, my mother finally called. She did not apologize or ask whether I had returned home safely. Her first question was, "The bill is $38,000. How are you going to pay it?" I laughed and gave her an answer that made her gasp. "Before I tell you exactly what I said, tell me what the weather is like where you are and whether it matches your mood today. Also, where are you watching from? I am curious to see how far this story will travel. If you enjoy stories about family, boundaries, and finding the courage to stop being used, please like and subscribe. Now, let me take you back 5 months, to the phone call that started everything. 5 months earlier, I was sitting in my Honolulu apartment reviewing a hospital compliance report when my younger sister, Phoebe, called me on FaceTime. She held her left hand so close to the camera that the diamond ring blurred. She shouted that Grant Keaton had proposed during a weekend in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was genuinely happy for her. Phoebe was 25, 7 years younger than me, and had dreamed about her wedding since childhood. Grant seemed steady and responsible, and he worked in operations for his family's mountain resort company. While Phoebe talked about dresses and flowers, I noticed my mother, Denise, moving around behind her. When I said I would request time off and check flights, Mom leaned into the frame and told me not to make plans yet. She said the wedding would be small and traveling from Hawaii was expensive. I reminded her that Phoebe was my only sister. Mom forced a smile and said the guest count was not final. Phoebe quickly changed the subject and described the glass conservatory overlooking Mirror Lake, where she wanted to marry. The call ended, but Mom's reaction stayed with me. She did not sound worried about my ticket. She sounded worried I might actually attend. A week later, Mom and Dad called together. That usually meant money. My father, Russell, owned a custom woodworking shop outside Pine Haven, North Carolina. He built cabinets and fixtures for expensive vacation homes, but privately I knew the business was struggling. A machine had broken, clients were paying late, and the bank had reduced his credit. Mom began by reminding me how much Phoebe admired me. Dad explained that the venue and vendors required immediate deposits. Grant's family would cover the rehearsal dinner, transportation, and honeymoon, while our family had promised to pay for the ceremony and reception. Dad called the problem temporary cash flow. Mom said they only needed a reliable third-party payer to secure everything. I asked for the total. After a pause, Dad said, $42,200. Mom quickly explained that I would pay only the $4,200 deposit and authorize the vendors to request final approval after the wedding. She promised they would handle the remaining $38,000. I asked why Grant's family could not use one of their cards. Mom became defensive and said the Keatons were already paying enough. Dad wanted to prove our family could honor its share. Then he mentioned that the Keaton Resorts planned to renovate several rental cabins, and his shop might be considered for the cabinetry contract. Suddenly, the wedding was not only about Phoebe, it was also about Dad's business, Mom's reputation, and a contract they desperately wanted. I should have refused. I had already covered a property tax shortage, part of Phoebe's tuition, and replacement equipment for the shop. Each time, they thanked me until the money arrived. Still, I did not want Phoebe to lose her venue because I was tired of being responsible. I agreed to review the documents. Because I worked as a senior healthcare compliance auditor, I read every line. The event hosts were Russell Fairchild, Denise Fairchild, Phoebe Fairchild, and Grant Keaton. My name appeared only on a separate third-party payment authorization. It allowed me to pay the deposit and required my written approval before the final balance could be charged. If I declined, the event hosts remained responsible. I highlighted that section and emailed it to my parents. Mom said it was standard language and would never matter. I signed and paid the deposit. Mom called me her lifesaver. Phoebe sent heart emojis and wrote, "Best sister ever." 2 days later, she created a wedding planning group chat. I learned about it when she accidentally sent me a screenshot, but I had not been included. She said the chat was for people living nearby and the time difference made my involvement inconvenient. A month passed without an invitation. Phoebe laughed when I asked whether she had my address and said immediate family did not need formal invitations. Then Mom asked me not to post anything about the wedding because Grant's family valued privacy, even though Phoebe continued posting dress fittings, cake samples, and venue tours. Whenever the Keatons appeared, my parents acted as if they were funding everything. Mom wrote that she and Dad were giving their daughter the wedding of her dreams. Dad posted that years of hard work had made it possible. Neither mentioned me. I told myself I did not need recognition, but I knew something was wrong. In my job, I never ignored inconsistencies. With my family, I ignored everyone. 2 weeks before the wedding, I still had no invitation or schedule. Phoebe insisted I was automatically included because I was her sister. She told me to wear navy or dark green and said the ceremony began at 2. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, she called it a gathering for the wedding party and immediate local family. The phrase made no sense, but I let it go. I requested 5 days of leave and booked flights from Honolulu through Los Angeles and Atlanta to Asheville. With layovers and delays, the trip would take nearly 18 hours. I reserved a rental car and hotel, and bought Phoebe and Grant a set of leather luggage for their honeymoon. 3 days before my flight, Phoebe posted photographs from the rehearsal dinner. She stood between Mom and Lorraine Keaton beneath a banner that read, "Two families becoming one." The caption said, "Surrounded by everyone who carried us to this moment." I had paid the deposit that secured the wedding, yet I was not part of the family she credited. I texted Phoebe. 4 hours later, she said the dinner had become a last-minute gathering, and there had been no time to tell me. I was still in Hawaii, so the excuse was pointless. The night before I left, Mom told me not to come to the house after landing. She said everyone would be exhausted and the rooms were filled with decorations. She instructed me to arrive at the venue close to the ceremony because there was no reason to come early. I asked whether Phoebe needed help getting ready. Mom answered too quickly that the bridal room was crowded. During the flight, I convinced myself wedding stress explained everything. Families became disorganized, brides became distracted, mothers became controlling. I drafted a short toast about how Phoebe used to practice weddings in our backyard when she was 8. Somewhere over the Pacific, I read it quietly and smiled. I still believed I would deliver it at the reception. After landing, I texted Mom, Dad, and Phoebe. Dad did not answer. Phoebe sent a thumbs up. Mom replied nearly an hour later with 3 words, "Ceremony at 2." No one asked about the flight or invited me to dinner. At the hotel, I called Phoebe, but she let it go to voicemail. I left a cheerful message telling her I loved her. She never called back. The next afternoon, I arrived at Mirror Lake Conservatory 20 minutes before the ceremony. At the check-in table, the attendant searched the printed list and tablet, then asked whether I might be listed under another name. I told her I was the bride's sister. Her smile disappeared and she contacted the family. Mom and Dad appeared less than 2 minutes later. Mom wore a silver-blue dress. Dad wore a dark suit. Neither smiled. Mom stopped in front of me and asked what I was doing there. I laughed because the question seemed absurd. I said I was there for Phoebe's wedding. Mom glanced toward the guests and lowered her voice. "Only family is allowed inside," she said. "You are not invited. Leave." I looked at Dad, waiting for him to stop her. Instead, he told me I should have understood the situation and not embarrass Phoebe. I asked what situation he meant. Mom said this was not the time to discuss family problems. I reminded her that she had called me a lifesaver when she needed the deposit. "Was I family when you needed my card?" I asked. She told me to lower my voice. Lorraine Keaton approached in an elegant cream dress and asked if everything was all right. For 1 second, I expected Mom to introduce me. Instead, she smiled and said I was connected to the wedding planner's billing department and had arrived at the wrong time to discuss an invoice. Lorraine looked confused and said she thought the finances were settled. Mom laughed nervously and called it a minor administrative issue. Dad allowed the lie to stand. I could have told Lorraine that I was their eldest daughter, that I had traveled nearly 18 hours, and that the deposit came from me. Then I saw Phoebe inside the glass hallway wearing her wedding dress. Our eyes met. She did not look surprised to see me outside. She looked frightened, but she did not move or call my name. She turned away. That was when I understood she knew. I told my parents I had heard their decision clearly, then walked back to the rental car carrying my gift. Mom called after me not to be dramatic. I sat behind the wheel, unable to start the engine. I had believed that if I kept showing up and solving their problems, they would eventually treat me like I belonged. Instead, they accepted my money and erased me. I deleted the toast from my phone. Then my professional instincts took over. I recorded the time, location, exact words, and names of witnesses, then emailed the notes to myself for a timestamp. As the ceremony music began, a notification appeared from the venue. Final payment reconciliation available. Approval required by Monday at noon. The invoice was $38,000. At the bottom were 2 options: approve payment or decline authorization. I looked at the conservatory where my family was celebrating without me, then at the word decline. For the first time that day, I felt clarity. I returned to the hotel, opened my laptop, and downloaded every wedding agreement. I did not want anger making the decision. I wanted the documents to tell me what I could legally do. The venue, catering, florist, and photography contracts all listed my parents, Phoebe, and Grant as the event hosts. My authorization was separate. I had paid a non-refundable deposit of $4,200 and agreed that the vendors could request my approval for the final balance. No payment could be processed without my written confirmation. If I declined, the hosts remained responsible. I was not canceling services or asking the vendors to absorb a loss. I was only refusing to volunteer another $38,000. That evening, Phoebe left a voicemail. She said the ceremony had been beautiful, and the reception was going perfectly. Then she apologized that things had become awkward outside. She claimed Mom panicked because the Keatons had been told I was not attending. She did not explain why, ask where I was, or check whether I was all right. Her voice warmed when she mentioned the invoice. She reminded me to approve the final reconciliation and thanked me for making her dream day possible. She ended by calling me the best sister anyone could ask for. I listened twice. The second time, I understood what the phrase meant. I was the best sister when I solved problems, paid bills, and accepted disrespect quietly. Around 9, Aunt Nadine called. She was Dad's older sister and a retired mediation attorney. She had attended the wedding and noticed I was missing. She told me Mom had given a speech about how she and Dad sacrificed for years to provide Phoebe with the perfect celebration. Dad thanked the Keatons for trusting the Fairchild family. Aunt Nadine knew the shop was struggling, so the speech confused her. When I told her what happened, she asked whose names were on the contracts and whether my authorization required final approval. Then she said, "Do exactly what the documents allow. Keep your records and let the adults who signed remain responsible." Her advice settled me. Calmness did not have to mean surrender. On Sunday morning, 4 invoices arrived. The venue requested $16,000, the caterer $12,500, the florist $5,700, and the photographer $3,800. I called each business and confirmed that declining would redirect the balance to the event hosts. No vendor would lose money, and the hosts would have 5 business days to arrange payment or a plan. I requested written confirmation. Then I clicked Decline Authorization on each invoice. I wrote that I had not attended or received the contracted services and would not provide voluntary payment. I did not mention the argument or insult anyone. I saved every confirmation with the contracts and changed my flight to Monday morning. Before leaving, I placed Phoebe's gift in my suitcase. Mailing it would have been another way of pretending nothing happened. At the airport, Mom texted, "Hope you have had time to calm down. We will discuss this after the honeymoon." I did not answer. During the flight, I slept for several hours and woke over the Pacific feeling something unfamiliar. Relief. When I landed in Honolulu, no one had asked whether I traveled safely, but the invoices would be redirected Tuesday morning. I knew exactly when they would remember I existed. Mom called at 9:14 Tuesday morning, 3 days after the wedding. Her voice was soft and cheerful. She asked whether I arrived home safely and said she hoped I had rested. It was the first time anyone in my immediate family asked about my trip. Then she said weddings were emotional and the incident at the entrance had been an unfortunate misunderstanding. I asked which part she misunderstood. Did she forget I was her daughter, or that I had traveled across the country? Her tone changed. She said this was not the time to reopen the argument. Then she reached the reason for the call. The vendors had contacted her. My authorization had been declined, and the remaining $38,000 had been transferred to the event hosts. She asked how I planned to pay it. I laughed because she sounded genuinely confused, as if my money still belonged to her after she denied I belonged to the family. Then I gave her the answer that made her gasp. "You said only family was allowed inside, Mom. So the family inside can pay for it." The line went silent. Then she accused me of being childish and creating a financial crisis over one uncomfortable conversation. I reminded her that she had not called me her daughter in front of Lorraine. Mom said she was preventing a scene because the Keatons had received a simplified explanation about our family. I asked what that meant. She admitted she told them I had been estranged for years and refused to participate in the wedding. I asked why she lied. She said the Keatons valued close families, Dad needed their business, and she did not want complications damaging Phoebe's future. I told her she wanted my money but not my presence, because I contradicted the image she had sold. Her voice sharpened. She reminded me that she raised me and supported my education. Then she said Dad's shop might fail if he lost the resort contract. I told her his business decisions were not my responsibility. She said Phoebe and Grant could not begin marriage with a $38,000 debt. I reminded her that 4 adults signed the contracts. She warned that the vendors might damage Dad's reputation. I said reputation was not something I could buy for him. Then she said I was the older sister and should be mature. I answered that maturity did not mean paying people to disrespect me. Mom threatened to tell everyone I abandoned the family over money. I told her to include the part where she accepted my deposit and threw me out. She said I was destroying the family. I replied that I had only stopped financing the version that excluded me. She hung up. Phoebe called 20 minutes later, already crying. Grant had received the invoices and wanted to know why my payment was withdrawn. I asked whether she told him the truth. She said he was furious because he believed Mom and Dad were paying. He had not known I provided the deposit or was expected to cover the balance. Phoebe begged me to approve the payment before his parents learned everything. I asked whether she knew Mom planned to keep me outside. She said Mom told her it would be easier if I did not enter the venue. She claimed she did not know Dad would speak to me that way. I reminded her that she saw me through the glass and turned away. She said she was moments from walking down the aisle and did not know what to do. I told her she made a choice. She chose the ceremony, the image, and the money over acknowledging me. Then she asked whether I could pay half. Even during her apology, she was calculating how much money she might recover. I said I would discuss our relationship when she was ready to talk, without mentioning an invoice. Dad called that afternoon. He said the vendors were demanding a plan and the situation was affecting his health. I asked why he signed contracts he could not afford. He said he believed I understood family responsibility. I asked whether that included standing silently while Mom called me a billing employee. Then he admitted the Keaton Resort contract could have been worth several $100,000. Mom feared that revealing family conflict would make the Fairchilds look unreliable. I told him hiding his daughter and lying about the wedding money made him unreliable. He accused me of letting his business collapse to prove a point. I asked whether he ever planned to repay the $38,000. He said the resort contract would eventually provide enough income. They had expected me to carry the debt until Dad benefited from the lie. That evening, I emailed Mom, Dad, Phoebe, and Grant. I attached the contracts and confirmations showing the hosts were responsible. I stated that I would not authorize payment and asked that all financial communication remain in writing. I said any future relationship with me required a specific acknowledgement of what happened, without excuses, guilt, or requests for money. An hour later, Aunt Nadine called. Lorraine Keaton had contacted her. The financial story was unraveling, and Lorraine wanted to know who the woman outside the venue truly was. Aunt Nadine called me before answering Lorraine's questions. I told her she could share the truth, but nothing exaggerated or invented. Lorraine listened while Nadine explained that I was Russell and Denise Fairchild's eldest daughter, lived in Hawaii, and had traveled nearly 18 hours for the wedding. She explained that I paid the deposit, was expected to approve another $38,000, and had been stopped at the entrance and presented as someone from billing. Lorraine repeatedly asked why my parents would do that. Nadine said she would have to ask them, adding only that I showed more restraint by leaving quietly than most people would have shown. That afternoon, Lorraine requested a meeting with my parents, Phoebe, Grant, and her husband. Grant later told me what happened. Lorraine placed the contracts and invoices on the table and asked Mom who paid the deposit. Mom tried to say the money came from the family collectively. Grant corrected her and said the receipt listed my card. Lorraine asked Dad why he claimed business savings were paying for the reception. Dad said he expected to reimburse me after securing new work. Lorraine asked whether he meant the renovation contract from their resorts. He admitted it. She told him their company could not award a major contract to someone who began the relationship with false financial information. Dad argued that his craftsmanship had nothing to do with a private family conflict. Lorraine said honesty and financial reliability were not private when evaluating a contractor. His shop was removed from consideration. Mom blamed me for refusing to cooperate. Lorraine asked how I could cooperate with a wedding I was forbidden to attend. Mom claimed I had been estranged for years. Phoebe finally admitted that I had continued helping the family and supporting her education. Grant asked why she never told him. She said she was ashamed of how dependent they had become on me. He asked why the solution was taking more money while pretending I did not exist. She had no answer. Lorraine made it clear the Keatons would not pay the $38,000. They had already covered their agreed expenses, and paying the Fairchild's share would reward deception. Grant supported her. He and Phoebe canceled their honeymoon and used the refunds and much of their wedding gift money to pay part of the vendors. They took a personal loan for the balance. Grant insisted it remain in both names because both had signed the contracts. Phoebe increased her hours at the design studio and later accepted a full-time position. Grant required financial counseling because he no longer trusted her to disclose important information. They remained married, but their beginning was nothing like the effortless future Phoebe imagined. Dad faced consequences too. Without the resort opportunity, he could no longer pretend a future contract would solve the shop's problems. He sold an old fishing boat and used the money for the first large vendor payment. He delayed buying equipment and negotiated a structured plan. He also had to admit to his employees that the company had expanded too quickly and depended on expected income. Mom's consequences were mostly social. For years, she had built an identity around charity events, fundraisers, and being a devoted mother. Lorraine served with her on an annual hospital gala committee. After learning the truth, Lorraine withdrew from their joint role and told the committee she could not manage donations with someone whose financial claims she no longer trusted. She did not reveal every detail, but Pine Haven was small. Questions followed. Mom described it as a misunderstanding involving an estranged daughter, but relatives confirmed I had continued supporting the family. Aunt Nadine refused to cover for her. When Mom accused her of destroying the family's reputation, Nadine said she had only stopped protecting a lie. Within a month, Mom resigned from the committee. She was not publicly chased from town, but people who once accepted every version of events began asking questions. Her image no longer controlled the room. 2 weeks after the wedding, Phoebe sent a long message apologizing for the canceled honeymoon, Grant's anger, and the loan. Then she asked whether I could cover one payment until her salary increased. She still apologized for the consequences, not for what she did to me. I refused and said I would listen when she was ready to acknowledge her choice at the venue. A month later, Dad emailed me with the subject, "No excuse." He admitted he knew Mom planned to keep me outside and agreed because he feared losing the Keaton contract. He wrote that he chose a possible business opportunity over his daughter and had no justification. He said he would repay the $4,200 deposit in 12 monthly payments. He did not ask for forgiveness or mention his health. The next morning, $350 appeared in my account with the note, "Payment 1 of 12." It did not repair the relationship, but it was the first apology that included responsibility instead of a demand. Mom also messaged me. She said she was sorry everything had been misunderstood and asked me to tell Lorraine that the wedding dispute had nothing to do with Dad's business. She wanted my forgiveness only to restore what she lost. I did not answer. Silence was no longer something they used to erase me. It was something I chose to protect myself. 6 months after the wedding, my life in Honolulu looked ordinary from the outside. I still worked for the same healthcare system, reviewed policies, interviewed leaders, and wrote reports about risks others overlooked. But I changed how I lived outside work. For years, I accepted extra assignments, answered family calls during meetings, and solved emergencies before asking whether they belonged to me. After the wedding, I began therapy. My therapist described my pattern as functional over-responsibility. I measured my worth by how useful I was. When my family had a problem, I believed love required me to fix it. If they ignored me, I tried harder. If they needed money, I treated my savings like a resource they could claim. Therapy did not teach me to hate them. It taught me to separate compassion from obligation. I could care about Dad without financing his shop. I could love Phoebe without protecting her from consequences. I could understand Mom's fear of judgment without allowing it to decide my place in the family. I created 4 financial rules. I would never co-sign a family loan. Any money I gave would be clearly identified as a gift or documented as a loan. I would not provide a credit card for an event I did not control. Before agreeing to a major request, I would wait at least 72 hours. Those rules were not punishment. They gave me time to think before guilt answered for me. I also shared some principles during financial wellness workshops at work. I never used my family's names, but I explained third-party payment agreements, legal responsibility, and the importance of written records. Coworkers later told me they reconsidered co-signing loans or sharing credit cards with relatives. Turning my humiliation into useful knowledge gave the experience meaning. I stopped spending free weekends waiting for family emergencies. I joined an outrigger canoe club and began paddling twice a week. I returned the wedding gift and used part of the refund for hiking equipment. I spent time with friends who invited me because they wanted my company, not my credit limit. Dad continued sending $350 every month and never missed a payment. His emails became more honest. He told me when the shop lost a client without asking me to replace the income. He began working with a small business advisor. After the sixth payment, he wrote that he finally understood how often he treated my competence as permission to place more weight on me. I did not forgive him immediately. Consistency mattered more than one thoughtful sentence. Still, I answered some emails. The door between us was not open, but it was no longer sealed. Phoebe contacted me nearly 5 months after the wedding. Her message was shorter than the first. She admitted she knew Mom planned to keep me outside and stayed silent because she feared losing the wedding and the Keatons' approval. She acknowledged that she saw me through the glass and turned away. She said she allowed me to fund a celebration where I might not be welcomed. There was no request for money, no blame, and no demand that I speak to Grant. She understood if I never trusted her again. That was the first apology that named the wound. I agreed to one phone call. I told her rebuilding our relationship would require time, honesty, and no financial dependence. She accepted. We now speak for about 30 minutes once a month. The calls are sometimes uncomfortable, but at least we no longer pretend. Grant and Phoebe are still married. They continue counseling and paying the loan. Their marriage began with a crack. But cracks can show where reinforcement is needed. Whether they succeed will depend on what they build from the truth, not how beautiful their photographs look. Mom has not offered a real apology. She still calls the wedding a misunderstanding and tells relatives I reacted harshly. The difference is that I no longer chase her approval or argue with her version. I sent one final email saying I would consider limited contact only after she acknowledged 3 facts. She told the Keatons I was estranged when I was not. She accepted my money while planning to exclude me. She denied my identity to protect her image. Until she could state those facts without changing the subject, I would not resume the relationship. She did not answer. I once believed a boundary failed if the other person refused to understand it. Now I know understanding is not required. A boundary is not an argument you must win. It is information about what you will allow and what happens when the limit is crossed. That was the most valuable education the wedding gave me. Family love should never require one person to become the permanent provider, rescuer, mediator, and silent witness. Helping can be generous, but repeatedly shielding people from consequences may prevent them from becoming responsible. A real apology must name the behavior, recognize the harm, and include an effort to repair it. Dad's repayments did not erase what happened, but they showed accountability. Phoebe's second apology did not restore trust, but it created a place where trust could grow. Mom's refusal taught me that reconciliation cannot be built by one person alone. I did not win because my parents had to pay $38,000 or because Dad lost a contract. Those outcomes belong to their choices. My victory was simpler. I stopped paying for a place in a family that welcomed my resources but not me. I did not interrupt the wedding, spread rumors, damage property, or manipulate contracts. I followed the agreement, told the truth, and allowed 4 adults to pay for the celebration they planned. For years, I thought being a good daughter meant absorbing every cost without complaint. Now I understand that self-respect is not cruelty, and saying no is not abandonment. Sometimes the most loving action is to stop rescuing people from the lessons their behavior has created. Real family is not defined by who shares your last name or calls when an invoice arrives. It is defined by honesty, respect, accountability, and whether someone still makes room for you when you have nothing to offer except yourself. If you were standing outside that venue, would you have approved the $38,000 payment or drawn the same line? Comment boundary if you have learned to protect your peace, or still paying if you are trying to stop carrying everyone else. There is no shame in admitting where you are. Recognizing the pattern may be the first step toward changing it.
Thank you for watching this story and sharing this moment with us. Everything in this video is fictional and created only for entertainment, dramatic storytelling, and education. We hope it reminds you that when life exposes someone's true intentions, the lesson is not to blame yourself for trusting them, but to trust yourself enough to live.